I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. We have some really interesting topics today, Billy.
I'm so excited about today's show. We've got one of our newish members of our Forestry Extension team. Grace Coy is going to be here with us. She's also the coordinator of the Urban Forest Initiative that kind of initiated out of here at UK, but works with many community partners. And she's going to be talking a little bit about building community forestry networks. So we're looking forward to hearing from Grace here. We also have Dr. Crocker on with us, and she's got a What's Bugging My Tree segment. And, Renee, the segment she's going to be talking about something we've been seeing around the region, so it's really timely in that regard. So I think a lot of people are probably seeing this in their own woods or on their own yard. So really appreciate Dr. Crocker putting this together for us, and really glad to have you all with us. So if you have any questions, you can use the chat function to interact with our presenters, and we'll get those questions to them. And if you're on YouTube, you can shoot us an email at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we'll respond that way as well. But glad to have you all with us, and glad to be with you today, Renee.
Me too. So let's get started. Grace, if you want to go ahead and turn on your camera. Welcome. I appreciate you being on the show again.
Yes, thank you, Renee and Billy, for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
I'm glad to have you, Grace. Looking forward to your topic. A lot of times we might think of trees in kind of a more rural setting, or, in the mountains or whatever, but, the trees in our urban areas are really important as well.
Yeah, of course. And I hope the topic today can kind of reach across that spectrum. I think having community forestry approaches, no matter if you're in a rural area or in a dense urban area, are important. And talking a little bit about relationships today and kind of the magic that happens when people get together and with their love of trees, we make stuff happen.
Go trees. I love it.
Go trees.
Awesome.
Looking forward to it.
Yes.
So as mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit today about building community forestry networks. I work currently with a group called the Urban Forest Initiative, and we have a very big focus on relationships and building relationships among professionals and community members. So there's a really kind of a robust set of approaches that can be taken depending on the area that you're in, but I'm going to kind of give a generic sort of formula of some of the key components that we see in community forestry networks that are successful, and just sort of describing, what that might look like from a general sense, and hopefully providing some inspiration if you should like to enrich the community forestry network in your area. So just a bit of an overview. First, I'll talk a little bit about the group that I'm a part of, just to give some context and a specific example, and then also to provide a background on the work that I do from day to day. Then I want to jump into the definition of community forestry as it relates to this discussion, because I know it's a pretty broad definition, but if we focus it just a little bit, I think it'll help the rest of the components sort of fall into place. Then I will be talking about some of the key components or patterns that we see in community forestry networks and how those are successful, the benefits that they can bring to an area, and also maybe sharing some steps that you might take if you're interested in either enriching the existing network in your area or if you'd like to get one started. So to start, I'll talk a little bit about the Urban Forest Initiative, and specifically the working group that we have as part of the network that we are trying to cultivate, both in Lexington and in the Bluegrass region, but more recently across the entire state of Kentucky. So this is a group of both forestry professionals, educators, there's government agencies, there's students from different campuses, not just the University of Kentucky. And it's meant to serve as this sort of dynamic group that is focused primarily on urban and community forestry. And it gives us a space and a platform to share ideas, to keep up with each other's projects, but also to sort of synergistically work on a shared mission of increasing preservation and enhancement of tree canopy in various different areas and all across that rural to urban spectrum. So our group is composed of people bringing a wide variety of perspectives and skills and expertise across the state of Kentucky. And it's been a very generative space for ongoing and, projects over the years. It's been in operation since I think 2014. And so that's kind of the background and firsthand experience that I'm bringing to this more general conversations of networks and working groups such as this one, and how they can provide enrichment to efforts and involving, a diverse set of stakeholders and community members in your community forestry efforts. So I'll go a little bit more into, I'll come back to the Urban Forest Initiative towards the end of my presentation to talk about some of the specific successes that we've seen from the collaborations within that group. But they're listed here as well, just to sort of illuminate some of the projects that we've found success and really have been driven by the synergies in our own community forestry network. And I hope to just offer this as an invitation to join in should this resonate with some of the efforts that you're trying to forward in your area. So I'll start too with the definition of community forestry. I feel like it's a broad definition, but overall, community forestry is this inclusive approach to forest management. And the definition of forest there can be pretty flexible too. We might be talking about an urban forest, we might be talking about natural areas or acres of forest that provide a resource to communities or statewide. But the management of those spaces and taking this community approach to decision-making and stewardship as connected to those resources. So I think overall community forestry is focused on improving livelihoods, conserving biodiversity of our natural spaces, and maintaining a healthy and thriving forest ecosystem. But the human component there is what I'll really be focusing on here today. So it's an active and effective management approach. It's relevant to all types of forests, but most of all, it's really reliant on these relationships and focusing on how those are so fundamental to a successful community forestry program. And I see this network of relationships as making up the broader community forestry network. And the components of that are kind of serving this entire sort of ecosystem function that then contributes to the whole of our ecological and economic and social components of forestry. So what better analogy to describe the key components of our community forestry network than with a tree? I thought, the structure and function of trees is so symbolic in so many ways, and it was super relevant and kind of trying to break down how community forestry networks function and the different parts that ensure their success. So I'll start with the roots. So just like the roots of a tree provide stability and nourishment, the foundation of collaborative networks lies in its members. So the roots here represent the diverse group of professionals and community members who form the network, or a community forestry network, bringing in different expertise, experience, and perspectives. So this group might include representatives from academic institutions, government agencies, community leaders, forestry practitioners, educators, students, and more. There's really no limit to the way that people might have a stake in the forestry conversation. And I see each of these sort of roots as, they're probably working on their own independent missions and projects, but all of those either in some way, whether it be a shared value or a shared goal, they intersect with community forestry or management of tree resources in some way. And so moving up to the trunk of the tree. So the trunk of the tree is the main support system that connects the roots with the branches. So similarly, I think the trunk of this collaborative community forestry network represents the organizational structure and governance that connects the members. So the members that have that stake in elevating or preserving community forestry resources. The trunk provides the framework for decision-making, coordination, and overall management of the network. It also serves as the main channel for information and resources that enrich the system as a whole. I see the support system and channel coming in a variety of forms. So It could be a working group, it could be linked to local government or boards. It could be just a group of people getting together, maybe a nonprofit or just an advisory committee, but something that provides a structure and a platform for providing a framework for projects or information sharing, and a platform for exchange. So I see that as a wonderful system for support and a channel for sharing information. Next, we have the branches. So the branches of a tree extend outwards. They're reaching for sunlight. They're creating a network of connections. So in the context of community forestry, I think of branches as symbolizing collaborative relationships and partnerships within the overall network. So maybe these different nodes that are coming out of this shared nexus point. I think these allow for knowledge sharing, increased collaboration on projects, and the exchange of ideas and resources that are kind of getting some unique direction apart from the whole. The point at which these branches diverge from the main kind of central organizational structure, but they're still kind of relying on that support. So this is where we might see like, collaboration on grants or projects or subcommittees or things like that. They're taking a unique direction, but they're relying on this kind of shared goals and initiatives that are set by the structure of the network as a whole. So next comes the leaves. So the leaves of a tree capture sunlight. They perform photosynthesis, and they enable the tree to grow and thrive. So similarly, I think the leaves in these collaborative networks represent the various activities, initiatives, and projects that are undertaken by the network. So these activities could contribute to the growth and development of the network, as well as the broader field of community forestry. So I think another analogy that could be made here is in regard to the more sort of seasonal or finite nature of leaves on a deciduous tree, like the one in the picture. And these can be connected somewhat to the sort of generation and conclusion of different projects throughout the year. So fruits and seeds. So these are the reproductive elements of a tree. They carry the potential for new growth and regeneration. And so in a collaborative network, the fruits and seeds represent the outcomes and impact generated by the network's collective efforts. So this can include research findings, policy influence, capacity building, and overall just positive changes in forest management. And these are things that could potentially also spread beyond the network itself. So contributing to the broader field of forestry, they're often the things that get carried outward and kind of act as an expander, and potentially planting nodes that turn into their own trees in the future. So it's a very important part of the entire function. So thinking about all those components kind of working together, what are, just some key sort of overarching features of that would make local community forestry networks more successful? And this comes both in the impetus of the network forming, but also, kind of an ongoing sort of thing that you would want to have as a feature to the relationships that you're building and the interactions that you're having with the community. Above all, you want to have common goals and objectives. Having, everything aligned programmatically is impossible, but I think as long as there's a shared mission, or at least some shared values that can direct the work that you're doing collaboratively, that's just a really great starting point. And so there's a language and a agreement of what community forestry is in your area and how you would like that to be channeled through your network and increased. I think everyone's going to bring their own perspective to the table, but having some consensus on what the goal is really important there. Also having diverse stakeholder engagement. So I mentioned with, having different types of agencies and groups involved is being critical to the structure of a network. I I think we get more perspectives that way. I think having, different generations and different experiences and expertise makes for a really wonderful kind of space for listening and sharing. And so as you're working on these common goals and objectives, you can appreciate and gather sort of diverse perspectives and ways of seeing approaches to different issues. So having that can really enrich the process and can make it to where it's not, forming in a tunnel. So there's a lot of diversity in the type of ideas and experiences that you have invested in your approach. Again, this kind of goes back to the trunk component as having some organizational structure and responsibilities. I think having a group or a board that is providing at least a framework for support, but also for sharing information is really critical. It's sometimes hard to bring people together into a structure that is different from the one that they normally operate in. But I find being able to establish those and having at least a regular sort of meeting schedule or a way of gathering and sharing information is super, super critical. And that ensures, I think, consistency and sustainability in whatever your efforts may be. And kind of on that same sort of note, having good communication and that channel for knowledge sharing, there can be a lot of redundancy in efforts. And so having really transparent communication strategies and ways of knowing what the issues are in your community, what other people are working on, and being able to communicate with transparency and clarity about all of that, I think is really a very important component of having kind of success in whatever issue it is that you're working on at whatever scale. So what are some of the benefits of having kind of these either representative of your local community or broader community forestry networks? So knowledge sharing and capacity building. We all have a lot going on and we all have a lot of knowledge to share. So I think that first one is incredibly important, and that we, through our networks, can have a space for sharing knowledge, sharing best practices, what's on, what's top of mind for people in the field, what are, kind of the newer approaches, what have people learned. I think that can either be formally through like training and skills development that enriches the network, or just through kind of informal discussion of what people are hearing from their audience or clients, and being able to weave that into a narrative for the group as a whole to sort of be informed by and to respond to. Again, too, these networks allow for access to diverse perspectives and getting input from a variety of professionals or community members. Next is going to be collaboration and coordination. So you can't have a network without partnership. So the broader network as a whole revolves around building relationships and partnership. It involves too coordinating kind of with different structures of operation and different needs, but all kind of with this shared goal of sustainable forest management. There's opportunities for synergy, whether that be on ideas or projects or programs that are ongoing. And so you have access to different groups that might have similar interests to you, and then you can broaden your shared goals through this coordination. And kind of alluding to the previous one, you can increase your capacity to do projects. Next is advocacy and policy influence. So this one, I have a background in community planning, and I think this one is a really important aspect anytime you're working with kind of long range community planning or trying to influence regulations or things like that. So having an established network with a structure and a set group of stakeholders can be really great, because you have a collective voice that you can generate recommendations or be influential in policy reform and provide this supportive framework for people that are trying to kind of shift paradigm or shift different, ordinances and things, there's a collective group and a shared voice that can be used to influence those types of things. I also think seeing groups like this form and recognizing the strength of these groups can be really empowering for community members, to see that change can be made when people get together over a shared goal and they're able to influence things that have a positive impact. Community building. So I think even just at the network level, it's great to be surrounded by people that have at least some shared values, and can sort of help you deepen not only your knowledge, but also just the types of connections that you have with the work that you do. It's great to be surrounded by professionals in your community that are working towards common goals. It also provides a structure of support when challenges emerge. And so those could be local challenges of just kind of dealing with similar types of issues or red tape or whatever it may be. But it could also be, on almost an existential scale of like just having a structure of support of people that are, providing at least even if it's commiseration, but hopefully more so inspiration to face the current challenges that we have globally. And so that structure of support, I think, is a really important piece of having this network to plug into. And the last one on this page is resource sharing. So that kind of goes back to knowledge sharing a little bit, but technical expertise and resources. So certain softwares or ways of doing analysis and sharing the wealth of that knowledge and technical expertise, I think, can be super impactful. I think also having an open exchange for outreach and informational materials can help engage different audiences if you have kind of a shared mission. And then collaboration on projects and grants. So it's a very direct sort of way of resource sharing, and having those connections and exposure can be really helpful if you're already kind of co-working together and an opportunity comes up. I think this is a great way to share resources and increase impact overall. All right, so this next one is just a little bit about, some of the most generic steps that one could take if they were interested in growing their local community forestry network. So I highlighted the first four because those are things that are like either maybe already in process if you're used to collaborating across, different organizations and communities, or if you were interested and maybe just had kind of already had these pieces and we're ready to get started. So number one, identifying stakeholders. I think just being able to do a little research or take a glance at the connections that you already have in the work that you do, and identifying the types of people or expertise that would be useful, and taking a more intentional approach to community forestry in your area. So once those folks are identified, soliciting interest and engagement, and bringing people together, I think is a great first step. I think then highlighting benefits of, whatever it is you're trying to do, whether that's communicating the benefits of trees or actually trying to get an active, forest management plan for your community. I think the key point here is to find your why. Why is it that you want to bring this group together, and what is it that you think would be kind of the selling point of generating a lot of momentum around this collaboration. Next up is defining that common mission. So getting really clear about your why, and then defining your how. So how could this network forward your why and increase whatever goal it is that you're trying to expand. And number four is fostering that communication and trust, and establishing clarity. I think that is kind of a little bit tied to that, getting that structure down, getting a platform for people to share information and resources, and really developing a lot of transparency with the different interest groups in your area so that there can be a flow of information and awareness that exists within the group. So there's not stuff happening kind of outside of that that network that could, influence the goals and objectives. So I think having that communication, establishing trust, eliminating, potential, gray areas and things like that, just being super clear and having a really clear channel, I think can be really, or it not only can, but it is absolutely a really important part of the process of forming the network. I'm not going to focus as much on those last pieces, but just wanted to have them on the screen. That's when you get into implementation and kind of expanding projects. And of course, number 9, you got to celebrate. When we get wins in community forestry, it's really important to acknowledge those. So I thought that was good to add. And so I'm coming back to a slide that I had sort of towards the beginning, and that's just to talk a little bit about the Urban Forest Initiative Working Group, which is the one that I'm a part of. So far, and of its time in existence, it's been Lexington focused, but in the last few years, it's grown to be spanning from the Bluegrass region and then now beyond that boundary into Kentucky. And so that is a group that works collaboratively in the setting of the University of Kentucky, but broadening out into communities and just really trying to connect with stakeholders that have an interest, particularly in urban trees or community trees, but having that be sort of a mother tree or a structure of support where people can meet others that are interested in kind of approaching urban forestry issues with, communicating the benefits of trees and celebration of trees and educating people on those different fronts. And so we're able to bring people together. And in the years that it's been in existence, it's been pretty successful. And so I just wanted to highlight that one more time. We're typically operating during semesters, but we always invite anyone who's interested in joining in our meetings to come on board and share your interests or what issues you're seeing in your community. And hopefully we can, connect resources to you should they be relevant to your goals. All right, thank you. That's all I've got for today. I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Grace. We greatly appreciate that. You know what? It sounds like your overall theme basically is working together and communicating. And, and I think, to be honest, that's in any project, no matter what you do. So I think that's a very good theme to have.
Yeah, relationships are super important. Yeah, I managed to stretch your very concise statement into probably like 3,000 words, but that's what I was trying to say, Renee. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, teamwork, right? No, certainly appreciate it, Grace. And I really liked your analogy there with the tree and how it represents the different parts.
Yeah. Well, and fun fact, that tree image was AI generated. I was able to generate that like artistic thing. I thought it was pretty cool. That's the first time I've ever done that. So
there you go. Brave new world for all of us, for sure. Yeah. No, really, Grace, I appreciate what you're doing with the Urban Forest Initiative. And, I would encourage all of our county agents and others, to get to know Grace and some of the work that they're doing, especially if you're in any the cities or urban areas, because a lot of the work that the Urban Forest Initiative could be very transferable over to your place. So it's a good connection to have. But Grace, we really appreciate you. Glad to have you on the team officially. I guess I don't know if we've had you on the show since you've officially been on, but if so, again, glad you're part of this. Yes.
Yeah. And we had a comment about the African Cemetery #2 has just started becoming involved in urban forests over the last 3 years.
And they've been doing a lot of work at that there in Lexington. It's cool.
Yeah, we've had some tree, or I think, and maybe it was Mark Coyne, he hosted a couple tree week events there, and there's a report. Yeah, it seems like a lot of exciting stuff happening in that space. So yeah, thanks for joining in and for mentioning the work there.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Well, I'm sure we'll have you on again, and thank
you.
Yes,
always. Thank you, Grace.
Right. There's always something bugging our trees.
I know, but thankfully we've got Dr. Crocker on guard out there for us. Keeping up what's going on. So
So
how are you?
what's bugging our tree, Ellen?
Oh, well, we're in this time of the year where there are all sorts of, depending on your perspective, interesting or annoying leaf issues happening with our trees. And the good news is that most of these are really minor. So we're in kind of late spring, early summer. In when the weather is wet in the spring, it can promote a lot of different fungal foliar issues. The majority of these, however, are not a huge deal for the health of your tree, but they can look pretty bad. And today I'm going to be talking about one of those that I think in the past week I've received a half dozen different emails about. So you might be seeing this on your trees too, whether they are the trees in your woods or the trees in your landscape, which is, I think, generally where people see them. So today I'm going to be talking about maple leaf blister. And if you're noticing black leaves on your red or silver maple in the early summer, it could be maple leaf blister, which is a fungal foliar disease that can cause dead leaves, dead patches on your leaves, and sometimes defoliation, so dropping of those leaves. In this edition of What's Bugging My Tree, I'm going to talk a little bit about maple leaf blister, what it looks like, potential lookalikes that are also occurring right now, and what does this mean for your trees. So what is maple leaf blister? Well, it's caused by a fungus in the genus Staphyna, and the fungus overwinters in the bud scales of the tree and then infects new leaves as they emerge. Infection severity is really determined by weather conditions when the buds are opening. If the conditions are cool and wet right when those leaves are emerging, there's going to be more disease that year. And this varies year to year. So you may wonder, where did this come from? It came out of nowhere. Where it came from was that it was sitting there waiting. Maybe it was a little bit of disease in past years. But if we get conducive weather conditions, which we seem to be getting more frequently, that cool, wet weather in the spring, then you can get more disease. So if conditions are really conducive to disease, you can get high levels of infection, high levels of this kind of black symptoms on the leaves, and even leaf drop, trees dropping a large number of leaves. But that's relatively rare. More frequently, what you're going to be seeing are leaf spots that can vary in color from kind of brownish to grayish to dark black. These symptoms typically start out green, like little green raised blisters, thus the name maple leaf blister. So those green patches, then those will turn colors over time as that tissue dies to these black colors. And typically with maple leaf blister, it will be darker black on the outside and lighter on the inside of those patches, but they can all coalesce and grow together as well. So if you've got a lot of disease, and this is the case in this picture from a homeowner that their tree, they thought their tree was dying. But what really is happening here is a severe infection. So those leaves are black and distorted. If you look up close, those dead blotches in the leaves, they have this irregular shape. In my mind, it almost looks like, there's ink on them, or they've kind of melted in some way, very distinctive. But there are some lookalikes that you might see this time of year as well. And I think the most common one that we're also seeing right now is anthracnose. Anthracnose is, again, another fungal leaf issue that is really promoted by wet, cool weather in the spring. So if we had wet, cool weather in the spring, not only can we expect to see more maple leaf blister, we can expect to see more anthracnose as well. And they look really similar. In general, anthracnose symptoms are slightly different. It tends to follow along leaf veins a little bit more, and it can move into the petioles, into the new shoots of trees, as well as be on these leaves. Whereas you see the maple leaf blister has kind of a different look to it. But if you're looking at, the canopy of your tree, they could look really similar. So this is anthracnose, but it very easily could be maple leaf blister from a distance. Although you can kind of see that pattern of, in this case, the dead patches that are caused by anthracnose following along the veins. The good news is that anthracnose, like maple leaf blister, is typically not a major health issue for your trees. It can look bad, and certainly it can cause some damage if it's moving into those new shoots. But with maple, it's more likely to stay on those leaves. You might have some leaf dropping, but those trees will put out another flush of leaves and be fine. Another thing that sometimes when people are seeing these symptoms will confuse it with is maple tar spot. Maple tar spot is another fungal disease that again is promoted by that wet weather. And with maple tar spot, though, you'll see these black spots on the surface of the leaves. It looks like someone has spotted some tar on there, and that there are these raised black spots. But typically this happens later in the summer, even into the early fall. And again, good news, this is not a health issue for your trees. If your trees have maple tar spot, that's a totally normal annual occurrence. Usually it's not too bad. There's not too much of it. Some years you'll get more of it, but it's not something that's going to hurt the health of your trees. A couple other things to note is that the fungus that causes maple leaf blister is actually closely related to other fungi in that same genus that can cause symptoms on other plants. So that same Tophrina genus has species that can infect oak leaves and cause oak leaf blister, that can infect peaches and cause peach leaf curl, and others. And so you can see that same blistering, and in this case you have blistering, but also that distorted leaf growth. So they look a little bit different from your maple leaf blister, but in that same family. And these are all promoted by those cool, wet spring conditions as well. So management, what do you do if you have maple leaf blister? Well, while this looks bad, these trees typically will put out another flush of leaves in a few weeks and recover just fine. You can expect more disease when conditions are cool and wet in the spring, like we've been having, when those leaves are just emerging. That's when they're going to be susceptible to the fungus. The fungus can infect them and cause disease. But once those leaves are fully developed and they're a little harder, a little waxier, that fungus is not going to be able to infect them. So they're going to be resistant to that infection, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. So while people do use fungicide sprays for some of these Tophrina species, I mentioned peach leaf curl and others, they're not merited for control of maple leaf blister. In addition, timing is really key, because what those fungicides are doing is they are preventing that damage to begin with. So it's really important that they're applied before those leaves emerge. So anything you do now wouldn't change the symptoms that you're currently seeing. It's something that would be done to prevent next year's symptoms. Because maple leaf blister is no cause for concern in your tree, you don't really need to worry, but you may want to make sure that it's maple leaf blister or anthracnose and not something more serious that's going wrong with your tree. In addition, if this is something you're seeing every year and you're concerned about or just don't like, there are some things that you can be doing to promote air circulation so that that moisture is less likely to be held to those leaves. Maybe some pruning that will improve that, as well as anything that promotes the overall health of your tree. For landscape trees, things like mulching properly around the base of the tree or watering during periods of drought, while they seem small, really help those trees grow and defend themselves against those minor stressors that can turn into big deals in the future. So with that, I want to thank you for joining me and learning a little bit more about maple leaf blister. Hopefully, if you see maple leaf blister on your trees, you can now breathe a sigh of relief that your trees are not actually dying, that this is maple leaf blister and will probably be gone in a few weeks. But if you're seeing something that's concerning you, I encourage you to reach out to your county extension agents or other knowledgeable professionals in your community. Thanks for joining me today. And if you'd like to learn more, make sure to check us out online or follow us on social media.
Well, thank you, Ellen. We greatly appreciate that. It's very interesting to find out, it seems like there's a lot of things that can be the same thing in the world. in your world, invasives or bugs or whatever, it just seems like there's always something that it could be one or the
Well,
other.
I think
But how do you?
there's a lot of things that can look similar and can look bad on your leaves. And frequently when I get questions about this, it starts out with like, my tree is dying. Here's photos of the leaves. And what I can see is that sometimes, yes, the tree is dying, and I hate that. Because no one wants to lose a tree. But sometimes it's not that the tree's dying, it's that the leaves are dying, or the leaves have some dead patches on them. And in my mind, that's a really useful thing to know, because it's a big deal if your tree is dying. But if a few leaves have a few patches on them here or there, it's not a cause for concern. It is totally normal. Our trees are resilient. They are hosts for many different insects, many different fungi, and some of those cause some damage to that tree, but typically the tree can deal with it just fine. I think it's really important to learn to recognize some of those common issues that we see pop up each year, things like maple leaf blister, things like tar spot or anthracnose, because if you can get a sense in your mind for what those are, you might be able to distinguish them from more serious issues if they were to come along. There are fungi that can kill your maple tree rapidly, things like verticillium wilt that you'd want to know and be able to distinguish it between some of these other issues, while something like verticillium wilt doesn't actually impact the leaves directly. It's operating the vascular system of the tree. What you'd see would be damage in the leaves. And similarly, there's an invasive insect not too far from us, Asian longhorn beetle, that attacks maples. It will feed on a broad range of things, but really likes maples. And if we found that, we'd want to know right away so that we could maybe eradicate it. Now that looks totally different from any of the things that we've talked about today, but if you're noticing weird symptoms in your maple, it would be good to rule out some of the common issues first and then be like, this is really weird. I should tell someone. Please do reach out.
Well, you're telling all our viewers right now, so thank you for that. I mean, I know I've seen the very thing in my front yard with my silver maple tree as well. So I was getting ready to send it to you, Dr. Crocker, but you took care of it per usual. I really
He's
appreciate
ahead of the game, which is
Yeah.
awesome.
And I will say, I have a hard time distinguishing maple leaf blister and anthracnose sometimes in the field. And so they can be really similar. I know I showed you some pictures where they look different, but sometimes they can look really similar. The good news is that for neither of them is it going to be something that you really got to get on right away. Your tree will probably respond just fine.
Now, will it have this every year once it has it once?
Not only will it have it every year once it has it, I mean, these are native fungi that are in our environment. They are around. So it will likely get low levels, like very small levels. And if you've got a big tree, you're never going to see a tiny little patch here or there. But the weather is really important for both of these. You might never notice it if we didn't have those conducive weather conditions in the spring.
Well,
but it does seem like we're getting wetter and wetter.
I was going to say
so-
wetter and warmer is kind of the trend. So look out, the fungal explosions.
Yeah, 2
I
days
don't know
ago we
about-
were midsummer. Now we are in spring again.
I know. Although I do love the rain we just got.
Yes,
we needed that.
Yeah, and so that's the thing that I think is changing. And so whatever maple leaf blister used to do in the past, there's what's happening now. And I know that with anthracnose, again, I know more about anthracnose than maple leaf blister because it impacts a lot more tree species. And it is something that I think has really increased in the past 10 years. We're seeing more disease and more severe disease. With anthracnose, because it can move into those new shoots, is more of a health concern for trees, especially a few tree species that are really susceptible, like sycamore and dogwood. I'm not as worried about maple. But things are changing, and so we will see what that means. You might see more maple leaf blister in the future.
Fortunately, we have Dr. Crocker on the job out there keeping up
Exactly.
with what's going on for us. So,
Yeah.
Helen, really do appreciate you and your lab and all the work you all do. It's so critical to our
Well,
work.
appreciate you. Thank you for having me on.
Excellent. Good deal. Oh,
A lot of good information
it
today.
really was very timely information. Really appreciate having Grace on with us earlier, and Dr. Crocker as always. So, folks, there's some good information in there. You know of others who could benefit from it. Please share it. The link for the show should be up in about a week or so. It's a great opportunity to get some good information. And Grace gave us a nice roadmap about how we can kind of work through, community and urban forestry efforts. So, yeah, check them out. Pass them along to somebody could benefit from them, especially those the maple issues we're dealing with right now. You'll probably be hearing them more and more in the next little bit. So
Probably, definitely. You can go to fromthewoodstoday.com to get all of our past shows. And if you have a suggestion for us on a show, please let us know. There's a little survey there that you can take about the show, and also send us pictures if you'd like. We've done several shows based on comments from viewers, so we greatly appreciate it. But we couldn't have a show if you weren't watching. So we greatly appreciate that. And like Billy said, share this. We want, we would love to have hundreds of people watching the show every Wednesday at 11. So we greatly appreciate you though, joining us. And, we can, it's almost time for us to go.
Yeah.
But we greatly appreciate you joining us. And if there's anything you see in your woods, let us know.
Yeah. Get out and enjoy your woods. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
From the woods today.